Alright everybody, last video we talked about Canada's economic system and how Canada's economic system works. Well, in this video we are going to be talking about trade with Canada, but not just trade with Canada, trade with Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Meaning, how do all three of these countries trade together? Do they trade together? If they do trade together, what agreement did they reach in order to trade together? Right, because Canada, the United States, and Mexico, these are the three largest, not the three large, actually they are the three largest countries in North America, but they're the three main countries in North America. That's what I mean to say. They're the three main countries in North America. Yes, you do have the countries in Central America that are part of the North American continent, countries like Guatemala, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, but the three main countries are Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So the question is, how do the main countries, how do they trade together? Do they trade together? And if they do, what agreement do they reach? Now, before we begin talking about NAFTA, which happens to be the North American Free Trade Agreement, so yes, they do trade together. We're going to talk about how. I have a question for you. Right? Here's our map. Canada, United States, and Mexico. If you had to create an agreement to make it easier for these three countries to trade together, what would you put in that agreement? Right? So think about it. Imagine that let's pick someone from our class. Let's go with Kiara. We're going to call it the Kiara Agreement. All right? So you have the Kiara Agreement. Well, what's going to be in the Kiara Agreement? What's going to be in the Kennedy Agreement? What's going to be in the Javier Agreement? If you wrote an agreement that had your name on it, what would you come up with? What rules would you come up with? What systems would you come up with to make it easier for Canada, the United States, and Mexico to trade? So think about that. Now, if you're thinking, man, I'm not coming up with anything. Yeah, it's kind of hard, isn't it? Well, let's talk about what people did, what these three countries did in real life. Let's begin. All right, so what is this treaty? Well, the USA, Canada, and Mexico signed a treaty, the NAFTA Treaty, the North American Free Trade Agreement, in January 1994. The treaty was negotiated by George Bush Sr. and signed into law by Bill Clinton. So George Bush Sr. was president from 1988 until 1992. Bill Clinton served 2 terms as president from 1992 until 2000. All right? Now, in this picture, the negotiations started around 1989, and they were bilateral, meaning it was the U.S. and Canada, and then there was the U.S. and Mexico were talking. Eventually it became 3 countries together. So that's George Bush Sr. That is the Prime Minister of Canada. That is Brian Mulroney. All right? This is Carlos Salinas de Gortari, if I remember pronouncing the name correct. I can't even pronounce the word pronounced correctly. If I pronounced his name correctly, by the way, I will put it in the description box in case I messed it up. All right? But these were the 3. All right? So the President of Mexico, the President of the U.S., and the Prime Minister of Canada. This is them signing this agreement into law. Now, in the United States, a president can sign a treaty, but the treaty doesn't take effect until Congress passes it. So, Congress passed it in 1994. By that time, George Bush Sr. was no longer president, and it was this guy, Bill Clinton. So Bill Clinton signs the NAFTA Treaty into law for the United States. So at that point, you now have a free trade agreement, the North American Free Trade Agreement, between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And by the way, as with all things when we're talking about any historical event, I'm giving you the quick version because otherwise this video would be 30, 40 minutes long. So there's a lot more that went into the negotiating with the NAFTA treaty. I'm just giving you the highlights and giving you kind of the core of NAFTA, okay? So, what is this treaty? Now, there's a lot of things that went into NAFTA. I'm going to give you the 4 main parts of NAFTA when we're talking about free trade. So number 1, it eliminates trade barriers. Now, it doesn't eliminate trade barriers like that. Well, no. It takes a little bit of time. But sooner or later, basically, the trade barriers start to get eliminated one after the other. All right? So think about, what are trade barriers? Well, those would be tariffs, taxes on imports, and quotas, which are limits on imports. And you also have embargoes, refusing to trade with the country. Now, the best way to put this would be, before NAFTA, the United States, Canada, and Mexico all put tariffs on each other to keep just about anything coming from the other two countries from coming in, or making it really expensive to come into one of the countries. That sounded actually very vague. Let me just use an example. The United States would put tariffs on goods coming from Mexico, goods coming in from Mexico, and goods coming in from Canada to make it more expensive. Canada put tariffs on Mexico and the United States to make those goods coming into Canada more expensive. Mexico put tariffs on goods from the U.S. and Canada coming into Mexico to make them more expensive. Every one of those countries are putting tariffs on the other. Now, if you think about it, if you're a company in Mexico, in the United States, or a company in Canada, that makes it very hard to grow your business internationally if you have quotas and tariffs being put on your goods when you try to go into the countries that border your country, all right? In the case of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Obviously, Mexico does not border Canada. But hopefully you get the point. It's a lot harder to grow your business if you can't even trade on your own continent, right? Without getting hit with major tariffs or getting hit with quotas which limit how much you can actually ship into another country. So, trade barriers are eliminated. Increased investment opportunities. Well, first of all, just the fact that the trade barriers begin to be eliminated, that means that you're going to have more investment opportunities in lots of companies, not just the company in your own country. Let's say you're a Canadian citizen, not just a company in Canada, but you're going to have more investment opportunities in companies in the United States and Mexico, because those companies get a chance to grow, because now they can ship into other countries on the continent of North America. You also have protection of intellectual property rights. Now, if that sounds weird to you and you're thinking, intellectual property, what is that? Well, think of the word intellect. Intellect means your thoughts. So what you create out of your mind, you can put a protection around and copyright. Sorry, I'm sure the camera just skipped a little bit because I had to deal with some kids out in the hallway. But you know what? Now we're back. So where was I? Oh yeah, intellectual property rights. So your intellect, anything that you can create. So think about artwork. Think about art. Art encompasses a lot of things. So art can be music. So let's say that you write song lyrics. You write entire songs. You create music in your head. You're like, oh hey, this would be a great piece of music, right? You can go through a legal process and own what you created. All right. So and by the way, that could be a painting. That could be a character that you draw. That you're able to draw it fully, and then you go, hey, you know what? I'm going to copyright this. Well, guess what? With intellectual property rights, that means nobody can steal your content without paying for it, right? No one can steal it without paying for it. Nobody can actually use, let's put it that way, nobody can use the material, the artwork that you created, whether it's music, whether it's a drawing, painting, whatever. Nobody can use that without first getting your permission to use it for free or paying you to use it. And so what this is basically doing is Canada, United States, and Mexico are working together. So if an American citizen steals the intellectual property of a Canadian, both governments are working together to solve that issue and make sure that that Canadian citizen gets the right payment, right? And international law can be kind of weird in terms of, can that Canadian person sue that American person? But if all the governments are working together, that makes it a lot easier to enforce copyright laws. By the way, I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, talk to me, let me know. 4, procedures for trade disputes. So if Mexico gets into an argument with Canada, what are the proper procedures for solving that argument? So that's also in NAFTA. Again, NAFTA is complicated, there's lots of debates, a lot more issues involved, okay? So I'm not saying that this is just the entire NAFTA in a nutshell, but I'm giving you the core components of NAFTA, all right? So this is just the foundation for us. Now, hopefully you don't have to write this down, But this is a great timeline. This will be in the PowerPoint that is linked to the module. This is a great timeline showing you not only when the negotiations started and when NAFTA was signed, but also telling you at what point in the timeline tariffs were eliminated. What's great is you can go through this and you can start to see all the tariffs that the U.S. had on Mexican products, all the tariffs that Mexico had on American products, all the tariffs that Canada had on Mexican products, Canada had on U.S. American products. So I can't even pronounce it to you. All right, just do all the combinations. It shows all the different tariffs that were just all over the board and how they're getting eliminated one by one. All right. So I hope that makes sense, even though I'm having the hardest time talking today. All right, so again, what is NAFTA mostly known for? Free trade. The ability of a Mexican company to ship into America or Canada, a Canadian company to ship into the US or Mexico, an American company to ship into Mexico or Canada. The point is, NAFTA focuses on free trade. Now, guess what? NAFTA was created in 1994. Well, 1994, think about this. In 1994, by the way, Mr. McGee, in 1994, I was 9 years old. All right, so I was in third grade. It's fourth grade. Fourth grade at 9. All right. Well, guess what? There was no internet. Well, I mean, the internet existed, but nobody had the internet in 1994. Personal computers were rare. There were no smartphones. In fact, most people didn't. In fact, everyone, unless you had some giant brick phone, nobody had a personal phone that they carried with them. All right, so NAFTA can only deal with so much in the era before digitization, in the era before the internet. And by the way, yes, we did have fun, because I know a bunch of you are thinking, oh, no internet, what did you do? We rode our bikes at our friends' houses, and we used our imagination. That's why I'm so awesome today, all right? So, because NAFTA, by the way, that was absolute humility that I said that, all right? Now, because NAFTA can only cover so much in the 90s, before you get to the era of digitization, before you get to the era of the internet, you needed to negotiate some changes. There was still a bunch of issues to be dealt with. All right, so President Donald Trump renegotiated the NAFTA Treaty on November 30th, 2018. And so basically and if you notice the picture, this is President Donald Trump, this is President Enrique Nieta of Mexico, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So all three of them got together. There were lots of negotiations between the three countries, but basically NAFTA was renegotiated and a bunch of changes were made and some things were added to update NAFTA, right? So the USMCA rules went into force on July 1st, 2020. So what were some of the changes that these three worked on together? Let's take a look. So car companies must make 75% of their parts in North America. So there are a lot of European car companies putting plants here in the U.S. Let's just use the U.S. for example. Building a plant in the U.S. I told you I'm having a hard time talking today. So building a plant in the United States, well, they're saying, hey, if you're going to build a car plant, you also need to have car parts. All the car parts need to be at least 75% made in the country that you have your plant in. That way, there's more business coming to that country. In this case, it would be the United States if there was a plant in the U.S. U.S. farmers get to sell milk in Canada, right? Canada still pretty much had a barrier set up. And when I say barrier, I mean they basically had an embargo where if you were a U.S. dairy farmer, you could not ship milk into Canada. This changes that, so now a U.S. dairy farmer can actually ship their milk into Canada. So U.S. farmers get to sell milk in Canada. Mexican trucks had to meet the safety standards. Safety standard, and we're talking about trucks, I'm not talking about your Ford F-150. We are talking about trucks as in those big trailers that haul lots of cargo on the interstate, all right? Well, Mexican trucks, the safety standards were a lot lower than what they are in the United States and Canada. Well, updating this agreement says, no, Mexican trucks to be on American and Canadian roads, they have to meet the safety standards of the Americans and the Canadians. Also, protection for digital intellectual property. So digital intellectual property, think about it. Most people put their songs online. People make podcasts. You've got your YouTube channel with its own original content. Again, people are making all sorts of music, listen, the internet does just about everything. There's everything. You will find almost anything on the internet. Some of it not really good, some of it really fascinating, some of it very creative. Artwork, right? Think about designs, web designs, things like that, right? Well, now NAFTA needs to be updated to protect digital intellectual property. So not just physical intellectual property, hey, I wrote this book, I did something that's on paper, but what about it being online, all right? Think about deviant artwork. Right? The deviant art is literally not the company, but the website where you can create all sorts of character designs. All that stuff needs to be protected. So digital intellectual property rights are added into NAFTA, which is now called the USMCA. By the way, the USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement. I mean, can't get much easier than that. So all that stuff is added into the USMCA. All right, so hope that makes sense. Again, conference with me. If it doesn't make sense, we'll talk about it a little bit more. But you've got 2 questions that you need to answer, okay? So 2 questions. Number 1, how does eliminating the 3 trade barriers of tariffs, quotas, and embargoes help trade between the 3 countries? So how does eliminating those things help trade between the 3 countries? That does not mean type this question into Google and then give me some answer from a website. I mean, I want you to think about it. How does eliminating the 3 trade barriers, how does it help trade between the 3 countries? That's the first question you need to answer. But there's a second question. Second question you need to answer is this. What would you add to the USMCA? NAFTA is now called the USMCA. What would you add to the USMCA that would help in terms of trade? So, I mean, think about it. We had digital intellectual property rights that had to be protected. You had elimination of trade barriers. So it's not just simply tell me a barrier that needs to be eliminated, all right? What is something, I want you to think of, hey, what's another thing that could be added to the USMCA that would help with trade? All right, so it could be anything, but it just has to make sense and you have to be able to explain it to me, all right? So number 1, how does eliminating the 3 trade barriers of tariffs, quotas, and embargoes help trade between the 3 countries? That's number 1. Number 2, what could you add to the USMCA that you feel would actually help trade? When I say you feel, I don't mean, I just feel it, so it must be right. Well, your feelings don't make anything right, all right? Explain to me how that would help with trade. So come up with something else to add to the USMCA. Come up with an idea that you think would help trade. It could be a security issue. It could be a way to make trade more efficient, safer, faster, whatever you come up with. Explain to me why that's a good thing, why it would work, okay? Those are your 2 things. Those are the 2 things you need to do. See, man, I'm tripping over everything. Those are the 2 things you need to do. Submit it to me, and let me know if you have any questions, okay? All right, take care, guys.